We are live. Welcome to my video. This is going to be a spoiler-free review of the 1989 NES game DuckTales. Woo! Yeah, so let me start by saying I have not recently watched the show. I don't know why. It just only occurred to me like yesterday, and I think there's like 100 episodes, so I literally wouldn't have been able to get it done in time to me completing the game. But I did also play this game on Game Boy, not NES, back not exactly when it came out, because I was too little to be playing video games, like literally, physically, but I played it sometime in the 90s, like, yeah, no more than 25 years ago. I both played the game on Game Boy and watched the show, and I remember at the time really feeling like it was a satisfying video game adaptation. The levels feel like you're playing episodes of the show. So before I go any further, right, and to be clear, I have not played the remastered yet. I do own it. I will play it at some point and do a separate video review of that one. This is for the original game as emulated through the Disney Afternoon Collection, which I own on Steam, which takes several of the most popular of the shows, and packages the NES games that adapt them. So yes, I have already talked about the sort of general things for arcade and arcade style games at the start of my Space Harrier 2 review. So I recommend you watch that. And yeah, I got to thinking recently, I think Disney is in some ways one of the better ones at doing these licensed video games, because honestly, like, other than this game, like, I think sometimes I go a little too hard on stuff like Hercules, Lion King, and I appreciate that it's technically Pixar, not Disney, and I think it was before Disney bought Pixar, but the Bugs Life game, and I didn't go too hard on the Aladdin game because I absolutely love that game. But yeah, compared to, like, and I appreciate there's also a level of the level of complexity is fairly different, but Enter the Matrix, as much as I love it, buggy mess, now, yeah. So this basically, you go through several levels. I think I will just briefly, yeah, you go through the Amazon with both the, yeah, you're on like ground level. You go to these caverns, you go up high, you go to, there's a level in Transylvania, which is like straight up a maze, amazing. And there's these African mines with the I suppose the most, yeah, I don't have an awful lot specific to say about that particular one. The Himalayas, where there's this, like, yeah, if you pogo into the snow, and I will explain pogoing shortly, you get stuck inside the snow, and it's not like, I don't think you lose health from it, but it's obviously leaving you very exposed. You can pretty quickly get back out, but seconds count in this. and it has this. Right, and then there's also this other thing that's one of the favorites of the time for video game developers when they really want to screw with you. It has a slippery surface, which, since it's the Himalayas, it's of course, I don't even have to tell you. It is obviously frozen water. Yes, it's ice. And then there's also the level, right, and to be clear, I'm not spoiling anything by telling you what the levels are, because the moment that you start the game, one of the first things you see is the level select screen, and all 5 of these are right there, And if I understand correctly, I played them in order this time, and I think I usually did back on Game Boy. You can play them in more or less any order, if I understand correctly. Anyway, the last level is the moon, and it's this wonderful thing of, it was past the era where you could put that kind of thing in something aimed at adults in this way. But for kids, it's just, oh, the moon, we're always hearing about the moon, it might be cool to walk on the moon, so you just kind of get to, and, it's not that Scrooge McDuck, who you control, has, like, he doesn't have one of those, like, round, like, bubble things, glass put on the head to so that you're not, because of, atmosphere and such, let alone an actual, like, spacesuit. No, you're just walking around normally, and I don't know, it has always bothered me way more than it should. They don't mess with the gravity in that level. It seems like such a gimme to add extra challenge. And on the moon there are, of course, aliens. If those on Mars are Martians, did that make the ones on the moon Moonians? But every single time it's deeply memorable. Like there's one thing about the African mines, there's these, now I remember, there's this like mine cart, which I genuinely can't remember, because I haven't watched the show in like 25 years, if that actually ever appeared in an episode, or they just put that in the intro as, like, the way that, certainly I remember distinctly there's stuff in the 1987 TMNT intro that is not in the show. But let's see, I think that might just about, every level is memorable and feels like its own adventure. I think before I proceed, I will just briefly say what emulation adds is quick saving, although there is only one slot, which I'm not opposed to, just, in case you are, because it is important for a reason I will talk about shortly, and also a rewind function, which, and it's again important, I mean, this, it doesn't actually take away all the challenge, because there is still, I remember playing this when I was younger, and, at this point with my, carpal tunnel syndrome, I would not be able to I wouldn't be able to complete this game without the ability, at the very least, the quick save, But I did also use the rewind quite a bit, and boy, would I have loved to have access to that back then. See, back then, in part because of no rewind, I found certain aspects of games like this really frustrating, because there's distinct unfairness in order to prolong the game. Today I find them charming. In the Himalayas, you go up against the goat, which will literally, like, it's this thing of, like, it doesn't quite jump high enough that you can run under it, but it does jump a little too high that you can't jump over it either. It's just, they did a really great job there. They must have high-fived when they realized they could actually do that. A lot of enemies, it's either or. Now, I think I will talk about, so one thing that, one reason you might want multiple, might have preferred to have multiple quick save slots here, is that this game has a time limit. Every single level you have to complete within a certain amount of time. And if you really do carefully and slowly explore everywhere in a level, you will not, you won't make it to the end of a level in time. So you know, that's one of the ways where, you know, it, and let's see, I didn't quite let it happen this time. There was one time where I realized, oh crap, I'm out of time, loaded you know, loaded my quick save, which was before the start of the level. Anyway, I think you lose a life and have to redo the entire level if you do run out of time. So yeah, and you know, the more treasure you get, there are, you know, it's, yeah, you're supposed to get a lot of treasure, which can take time. And like I mentioned, a non-zero number of the levels are technically a maze. So, and the, let's see, yeah, there are various reasons why you might, the time limit genuinely might put a lot of pressure on you. And let's see, I think that does get us nicely to, so yeah, I mentioned before a pogo. So there's a couple of things you could do this. You know, you walk side to side, and you can climb up and down. You know, if there's something hanging that you can climb up. And you know, yeah, it is a side-scrolling action adventure. And I probably have to say the game it most reminds me of is Mega Man 2. I can imagine some of the other Mega Mans, especially the early ones as well. That's the only one I've played. Did play that one all the way through on Game Boy without any kind of rewind back in the day. I forget if I did get all the way... I probably did get all the way through this one. I believe I had access to it for long enough, and I was a stubborn little... Yeah. But I still am. I'm physically larger, but still very stubborn. But that is one area where it is very much, you know, in Mega Man, when you complete a level, you get access to a new weapon and or tool, and you have to use the weapons and tools very smartly for the rest of the game in order to actually complete it. Like, legit, if you don't know what you're doing, if you're using the wrong weapon in a situation, or you just don't have it, you're just screwed. And the fact that this has so much less, I do think, is a, you know, tiny bit to its detriment. But basically, the one thing you can use is the, right, and just briefly so I don't forget, this also has a number of characters from the show pop up, both the ones on your side and ones not on your side. I hesitate to say good and evil because, like, Scrooge McDuck is one of the worst capitalists around, so I mean, evil, pretty inarguable. But I do appreciate that the show did give us an evil capitalist also. Anyway, you know, his nemesis, Flint Heart Glomgold, I think is, yeah. Anyway, yes. So the one thing that the player has that you can use in this game is, other than the help of, you know, you get by with a little help from your friends. The one thing you have is your cane, which is apparently much sturdier than I would have thought. But I forget, I think he might also use it in a at least somewhat similar way, at least at times in the show. And, you know, it's cartoon, so I'm not saying there's something wrong with it. Basically, you can use it as a pogo. Told you I'd get back to that. And you know, it's like how, you know, in Super Mario Land 1, if you, and some of the other, you know, early Super Mario Land games, if you, you know, yeah, if you're under something and you jump up into it, you might break it depending on what it is. Here you have to jump over it and then pogo onto it. And like in Super Mario Land 1, if you jump onto an enemy, a lot of the time that's going to kill it, with some exceptions. Interestingly enough, in both of these, one exception is this, let's see if I can find, yeah, this like plant that you know, eats up, yeah. But unlike Super Mario Land 1, if you jump onto something and you don't have the pogo out, it's not going to hurt them. It's going to hurt you more than them. It won't hurt them at all. And that's part of why it's annoying that the... And to be clear, this is not me, like, looking back. No, I thought this at the time. Ask anyone who knew me at the time, because I'm pretty sure I told everyone. The controls for the pogo and also the other way you can use the cane, which I'll get to shortly, they are more complicated than need to be. Basically, you know, A button is jump, B button is for the cane, and in Super Mario Land 1, if you want to fire a fireball, you just press B. Once you have the, you know, once you've picked up the flower, I want to say. Wow, it's a long time since I even thought about those games. Anyway, and, you know, in Mega Man, if you want to shoot, you just press the B button, shoot or use tool. In this, in order to use the pogo, you have to hold down, press B, then jump. And if you let go of down, it's not going to use the pogo anymore. I forget if that's always the case, but it is certainly at least sometimes the case. And yeah, I genuinely do not know why they made it, you know, yeah. See, I can appreciate that the other way to use the cane is also B button. But what I've always felt is just have it that you have to jump before, you know, if you jump and then press the B button, that should get the pogo out. And I haven't played the remaster yet. I hear that they simplified it. I could honestly imagine that that's just how they did it there, because it's such a silly idea. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. I'm not sure if I've made the following clear. Given that there's not a huge amount of levels, you know, part of the way that they make the game longer is by, you know, you're unlikely to be able to complete this the very first time you sit down with it. You'll have to play some of the levels multiple times to figure out everything, you know, for example, the maze. And, you know, yeah, by the end, after you've played, you know, a bunch of times, finally you'll be able to do it in one entire sitting. Because, again, right, that's, I forget if I mentioned, originally there was no save function. You would have to get all the way through the game in a single sitting. Now, the other way that you use the... Right, and I do also briefly want to say, they do some fun stuff with the pogo, such as if you jump onto an enemy, you get sort of a boost so you can keep jumping. So there's at least one time in this where there's a massive gap that you have to clear, but there's enemies in the gap, so you just have to jump between the enemies, which, yeah, that's quite fun, very satisfying. But yeah, the other thing that you do with the cane, I think I'm going to call it cane golfing, because he is basically doing a golf swing, and there's this quite adorable little, you know, they could only fit in so much, like, really cartoony stuff, because it is, you know, an action game. You know, and I think also limitations of the time. Yeah, because there's more cartoony stuff in something like Earthworm Jim, which came a few years later. But yeah, you know, some of the enemies when they're defeated, there's a kind of cartoony thing going on. But also, if you cane golf into something that you cannot, some kind of immovable object, you are not an unstoppable force. So, basically, like, his eyes will, like, kind of roll back and forth in their sockets, and he'll, like, look dizzy. They're the kind of cartoon character Dizzy, so that's kind of cute. Other than that, it has the sense of adventure and tension of the show. It captures that very well in a way that, sometimes you'll play, like, that is one thing I will say I do maintain about the Hercules game. I don't think it captures the sense of immortality, and I do think it could have. But I talk about that in my video on the Hercules video game. But yeah, here, like in the show, from what I recall, it feels like, okay, there's a lot of things that could go wrong here. There's a lot of things that they have to watch out for. And yeah, here we do very much have this, that same quality. But yes, the cane golfing basically launches a small object, like a rock, into the air, which can be extremely useful because sometimes there are enemies up there, and there are a couple of different reasons why it's good to, The controls, again, I don't know why they did this. Like, I've read several places, oh, you just gotta, like, hold down left or right and then stand next to something that you can hit, and if that were only so. But for some reason, in my experience, you cannot always depend on it happening if you're not also holding down up. Yeah, that sounded confused. Hold the up button. You have to press that, press and hold for it to work. And there's this one place that I'm so glad I now finally have rewind for, that always kicked my ass, because there's an enemy who has, like, this little... Do I want to give that away? I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll just say that there's an enemy where there's this little thing that you might want to swing into it. The enemy, if given enough time, will just walk right past it and into you, so you have to get up to the thing you want to hit really closely and then hit it. And yeah, if you don't press and hold up, he's just not going to swing, and then you're wasting those extremely valuable seconds waiting for the enemy to walk back away. Now, I think that does cover almost everything. I thought they made a good choice of the characters to include and how. I'll just briefly... So let's see, Huey, Dewey, Louie, and Webby, will give you information, which feels very much like them. Let's see. Miss Beakley will drop ice cream cones. Launchpad McQuack will fly you back to Duckburg, and at one point he gives you a lift. And let's see... Yeah, I think that is what I will say. But yeah, those also all do feel genuinely like stuff they do in the show as well. And I do still remember the glee I felt when, the first time, I was playing it, and suddenly, it's Launchpad. I didn't call him that because I'm Danish, and I don't even remember what we call him here. But anyway... Yeah, I recognized him, and I was like, because he's one of my favorite characters. One thing I will say, I liked the boss fights. I wish that they had made more use. I won't give away exactly, how much, but yeah, when I wish that there was more where you use the cane golfing thing, because, I think more of the time than necessary, because it's not really a spoiler to say, I guess I won't give away exactly how many, but several of these levels do have boss fights. You know, there are multiple boss fights in this, and I think it's a little bit too much of the time that the thing you're doing is the pogo jump, which again, in part because it reminds me so much of Mega Man. You know, it's like, I mean, in Mega Man, you've got like a bunch of different things you can use, and you have to figure out the exact right one. And here, like, you're basically you're finding a safe place to stand, and then waiting for the enemy, for the boss enemy to lower their guard so you can damage them, and then pogoing onto them. You know, it just, that got a little repetitive, and I don't know if that was maybe some kind of thing of like they had to get it out for a certain deadline or something. Like, let's see, the show ran 87 to 1990, so I can imagine they wanted to make sure to get the game out before the show ended, and that was maybe something that, yeah. I think that does cover... Right, at least one of the boss enemies is a fun character from the show that I will say was someone that I wanted to fight when watching the show and was glad to get to when I played the game way back when. I suppose I will just briefly talk about, because I don't know for sure if the following are in all of the other... This is the only Disney Afternoon, collection game I've played so far. And right, in case you are new to, the way I play these right now, like, I play an emulated game every 3... It's not always going to be 3 weeks, but every 3 games I play is going to be an emulated game. But I got so many, and I really don't want to risk burning out. It's going to be a while before I get back to the Disney Afternoon collection. You know, same as... going to be a while before I'm back to Contra, and yeah. But this one, right, and it also, when you fire up, before you choose a game, it plays the Disney Afternoon, music, which also, that was indeed how I watched DuckTales, 25 or more years ago, the Disney Afternoon, and yeah, they really, it was a shrewd business decision, because you knew that kids were going to love at least one of these shows, beg their parents to buy toys and or video games in this case from at least one of them. And yeah, now yes, so this has a how to play, which is quite useful. And it has the modes Time Attack and Boss Rush with international online leaderboard. So very, very clever there. And yeah, they are exactly what you think they are. Rewind is disabled during them. I just realized I did not check. I can imagine quick save is as well, but don't quote me on that one. But yeah, that is genuinely a great, because like if I did not have carpal tunnel, I would probably have tried Time Attack and or Boss Rush, because I think I did okay eventually. 25 years ago, playing it on Game Boy, eventually I got to a point where I could get through it with a pretty decent amount of treasure in a pretty decent amount of time. And yeah, just, right, the time limit I read somewhere is, perhaps in part to avoid players just farming treasure, because there are parts of levels where if you do the same thing multiple times, it'll lead to treasure each time. And yeah, someone might just do that like 100 times or something, I think that is everything. Right, I think I'm gonna just briefly, if it'll, there we go. So yeah, it took me 99 minutes to get all the way to the end of this game at this time. And yeah, solid yeah, overall 8 out of 10. I considered lower on account of the what's it called, the word, the limitations of, you don't, like, you pretty quickly feel like, okay, the like the pogoing is fun throughout, and honestly so is the cane golfing, but you get used to it more or less, if that makes sense, pretty quickly. Where, like, for example, and this is 100% contemporary to this game, Super Mario Land 1, once you have that was actually something I thought was a slight disappointment about the second game, but in the first one, you can use the fireball to gather coins, and it actually, yeah, come to think of it, I think that one does also have a time limit. I just found it less frustrating, in part because levels are not, I don't remember any level in Super Mario Land 1 being a maze, for example, but yeah. And in that one, from what I recall, you're always moving left to right. In this one, it's sometimes back and forth, But yeah, you launch that one, and it, like, moves at an angle, which is not like this. Anyway, yeah, I would not have hated if there was maybe something, like, yeah, honestly, here's a freebie. Why not make it so that, maybe in place of the cane golfing, make the cane a boomerang, and then you could just, you could aim it just slightly, and if you're not standing in the spot when it returns that you were when you threw it, you'll have to go and pick it up, and maybe that takes like a second. He has to, like, bend over and pick it up. So you're either exposed in that you're standing in the same spot, and if you miss with the boomerang, oops, especially against something that moves fast, like, for example, an enemy. Right, that's also, a major thing here is, memorizing the attack patterns and weaknesses, the times for you to attack enemies. Anyway, yeah, and yeah, you'd either be exposed, after throwing it, or when you're going to go pick it up. So, I think that could have been a good, yeah. Anyway, that is it for this one. Went longer than I expected, but yeah, it's a really, really fun game that, like, that was all obviously one of the big things that the developers had to ensure with a game like this, because they had to make them unfairly, or they had to make them difficult, and at times, at least at first, until you get used to it, unfairly so, in order to make them last long enough. So they also had to make it really addictive and rewarding to play, and yeah, they really nailed it with this. Like, I mean, obviously, I could not tell you if this is something you would at all enjoy if you've never watched the show, and having not watched the show in a quarter century, I cannot say if that, still is anything, particularly, I can imagine there's, like, nostalgia, say, like, I remember enjoying it, but I could not tell you if it... I mean, I will say, even as a kid, I realized that TMNT was pretty immature and childish in ways where I wish it had been more mature. And before you say, oh, kid show, Saturday morning cartoon, so was the Clone Wars, so... But yeah, bottom line, if you do like the show, whether or not you have fond memories of playing this before, I definitely do think that it is a really fun, if you like arcade-style games. Like, I would not really, I wouldn't say to make this the very first one, unless you're 100% comfortable using a lot of rewind and the quick save and such. Like, I would probably say choose something without a time limit the first time and yeah, there are others out there that are less, like, punishing than this can be, but yeah. Now, if you will excuse me, I solved a mystery. Gonna go rewrite history. And add the boomerang and or at least make the controls less awkward.